The mansion loomed like a shadow against the moonlit sky, its grand facade cracked and weathered by time. For a hungry boy with nowhere else to go, it was a beacon of hope, or at least a place to find a scrap of food. He slipped through the rusted gate, his heart pounding as he approached the towering doors. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. The boy moved cautiously, his stomach growling louder than his fear. He rummaged through the kitchen, finding nothing but stale bread and a few cans of food. As he turned to leave, a faint sound stopped him in his tracks. It was soft, almost imperceptible, a cry, coming from somewhere below. Curiosity tugged at him, pulling him toward the basement door. He hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run. But something about that cry felt human. He descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last, until he reached the bottom. What he saw made his blood run cold. A woman, her face pale and bruised, was tied to a chair. Beside her, a baby lay swaddled in a dirty blanket, whimpering softly. The boy froze, his mind racing. Who were they? Why were they here? And what kind of monster could do this? The woman's eyes met his, wide with fear and desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Help us." The boy's heart ached. He was just a kid, barely able to take care of himself. But in that moment, he knew he couldn't walk away. Little did he know, this decision would change everything. The boy stood frozen in the dim light of the basement, his mind racing. He was just a child, no older than 12, and the weight of the situation pressed down on him like a stone. Hunger had driven him to this mansion, but now he faced a choice far greater than finding his next meal. The woman's pleading eyes bore into him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, untie us. He could come back any minute." The boy hesitated. He had spent his life surviving on the streets, stealing when he had to, avoiding trouble at all costs. Helping her meant risking everything. But the baby's soft cries tugged at something deep inside him, a memory of warmth, of safety, of a time before the world had turned cold. Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman swallowed hard, her face pale and drawn. "A man, he said he could help me. He promised me a job, a place to stay. But when I got here," her voice broke, and she looked away. "He locked us in this basement. I don't even know how long it's been." The boy's stomach churned. He had seen cruelty before, neglect, anger, indifference, but this was something else. This was evil. He glanced at the baby, who was now quiet, staring up at him with wide, innocent eyes. The boy felt a surge of protectiveness he hadn't known he was capable of. He couldn't leave them here. He just couldn't. But fear still gripped him. What if the man came back? What if he was caught? He was just a kid, what could he possibly do against a grown man? The woman seemed to sense his hesitation. "I know you're scared," she said softly. "I am too. But if you don't help us, he'll kill us. I know he will." Her words struck him like a blow. The boy clenched his fists, his fear giving way to determination. He couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't. "Okay," he said, his voice firmer now. "I'll help you. But we have to be quick." He moved to untie the ropes binding her wrists, his small fingers working frantically against the tight knots. The woman winced as the ropes fell away, her arms red and raw. She immediately reached for the baby, cradling him close to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." The boy nodded, but his relief was short-lived. A sound from upstairs made them both freeze, a door slamming shut, followed by heavy footsteps. The woman's eyes widened in terror. "He's back." The boy's heart raced. They were out of time, the footsteps grew louder, echoing through the mansion like a death knell. The boy's mind raced as he looked around the basement for a place to hide. His eyes landed on a stack of old boxes near the corner. "Over there," he whispered urgently, pointing to the boxes. The woman nodded, clutching her baby tightly as she hurried to the hiding spot. The boy followed, his heart pounding in his chest. They crouched behind the boxes, barely daring to breathe as the basement door creaked open. A man's voice rang out, cold and sharp. "Clara? Where are you?" The woman, Clara, flinched at the sound of her name. The boy could feel her trembling beside him. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand, a silent promise that he wouldn't leave her. The man's footsteps descended the stairs, slow and deliberate. He paused at the bottom, his shadow stretching across the floor. The boy peeked around the boxes, catching a glimpse of the man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that seemed carved from stone. "I know you're down here," the man said, his voice dripping with menace. "You can't hide from me." Clara's grip on the boy's hand tightened, her nails digging into his skin. The boy held his breath, praying the man wouldn't find them. After what felt like an eternity, the man let out a frustrated growl and turned back toward the stairs. "Fine. Stay down here and rot for all I care." The door slammed shut, and the sound of his footsteps faded away. The boy let out a shaky breath, his body trembling with relief. "Who is he?" the boy whispered once he was sure the man was gone. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she began to speak. "His name is Victor. He found me when I was at my lowest. I was desperate, no job, no money, no one to turn to. He promised me a fresh start, a place to live, work to support my baby. I thought he was my savior." She paused, her voice breaking. "But as soon as I got here, he changed. He locked me in this basement, said I owed him for his kindness. He's not right in the head. He talks to himself, gets angry over nothing. I don't know what he's capable of." The boy listened, his heart aching for her. He had seen enough of the world to know that monsters often wore friendly faces. "Why doesn't he just let you go?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe he's afraid I'll go to the police. Or maybe he just likes having control over someone. All I know is that if we don't get out of here soon, he'll..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The boy's jaw tightened. He didn't know how, but he was going to get Clara and her baby out of this nightmare. "We'll find a way," he said firmly. "I promise." Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that they might actually make it out alive. The boy and Clara stayed hidden behind the boxes, their ears straining for any sound from upstairs. The mansion was eerily quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made them jump. Clara's baby stirred in her arms, letting out a soft whimper. She rocked him gently, shushing him with a quiet lullaby. The boy watched her, his admiration for her strength growing. Despite everything she had been through, she was still fighting, for herself, for her child. "We need a plan," the boy whispered. "We can't just stay here and wait for him to come back." Clara nodded, her face pale but determined. "There's a window in the basement," she said. "It's small, but maybe we can squeeze through it. If we can get outside, we might be able to run for help." The boy's eyes lit up. "Where is it?" Clara pointed to the far corner of the basement, where a narrow window was barely visible in the dim light. It was high up, but with some effort, they might be able to reach it. "Let's go," the boy said, standing up. But before they could move, the sound of a car engine roared to life outside. Clara's face went white. "He's leaving," she whispered. "But he'll be back. He always comes back." The boy hesitated. If Victor was gone, even for a short time, it might be their best chance to escape. But the thought of being caught in the act sent a chill down his spine. "We have to try," he said finally. "We can't waste this opportunity." Clara nodded, though her hands were trembling. Together, they moved toward the window, the boy leading the way. He climbed onto an old crate, reaching up to push the window open. It was stiff, rusted shut from years of neglect, but with a grunt of effort, he managed to force it open. Cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. The boy peered outside, his heart sinking as he realized how high up they were. The ground was at least 10 feet below, and the drop was onto hard, uneven pavement. "It's too far," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I can't jump with the baby." The boy bit his lip, his mind racing. They needed something to cushion the fall, a blanket, a mattress, anything. He scanned the basement, his eyes landing on a pile of old clothes in the corner. "Wait here," he said, jumping down from the crate. He hurried over to the pile, grabbing as many clothes as he could carry. He spread them out beneath the window, creating a makeshift cushion. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "Okay," he said, turning back to Clara. "I'll go first. If I make it, I'll help you and the baby down." Clara hesitated, her eyes filled with fear. What if he comes back while we're trying to escape? The boy's stomach churned at the thought, but he forced himself to stay calm. "We don't have a choice. We have to take the risk." Clara nodded, though her face was pale. "Be careful." The boy climbed back onto the crate, his heart pounding as he hoisted himself up to the window. He took a deep breath, then swung his legs over the edge. For a moment, he hung there, staring down at the ground below. Then, with a silent prayer, he let go. He hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. But the pile of clothes cushioned his fall, and aside from a few bruises, he was unharmed. He scrambled to his feet, looking up at the window. "I'm okay," he called up in a hushed voice. "Your turn." Clara's face appeared in the window, her expression a mix of fear and determination. She handed the baby down to the boy, who caught him gently. Then, with a deep breath, she climbed onto the crate and began to lower herself out the window. But just as she was about to let go, the sound of a car door slamming shut echoed through the night. Victor was back. The sound of Victor's car door slamming sent a jolt of panic through the boy. He clutched the baby tightly, his mind racing. Clara was still halfway out the window, her eyes wide with terror. "Hurry," the boy whispered urgently, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. Clara hesitated for only a moment before letting go. She landed hard on the pile of clothes, wincing as she scrambled to her feet. The boy handed the baby back to her, his hands trembling. "We have to run," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." But before they could move, the sound of Victor's footsteps reached their ears. He was coming around the side of the mansion, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The boy's heart sank. They were trapped. "This way," Clara whispered, grabbing the boy's arm and pulling him toward the shadows of the mansion's overgrown garden. They crouched behind a thick hedge, their breaths coming in shallow gasps. Victor's voice cut through the night, sharp and angry. "Clara! Where are you?" The boy felt Clara stiffen beside him, her grip on the baby tightening. He could see the fear in her eyes, but also a flicker of determination. "We can't outrun him," she whispered. "Not with the baby. We need a distraction." The boy nodded, his mind racing. He glanced around the garden, his eyes landing on a loose brick lying near the hedge. An idea began to form. "Stay here," he whispered to Clara. "I'll draw him away." Before she could protest, he grabbed the brick and darted out from behind the hedge. He hurled the brick as far as he could, sending it crashing through a window on the far side of the mansion. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the night. Victor's head snapped toward the noise, his eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" he growled, stalking off in the direction of the broken window. The boy held his breath, watching as Victor disappeared around the corner of the mansion. He turned back to Clara, motioning for her to follow. "Go, go," he whispered, leading her toward the front gate. They moved as quickly and quietly as they could, the baby nestled safely in Clara's arms. The gate was just ahead, its rusted hinges creaking softly in the breeze. But as they reached it, the sound of Victor's voice stopped them in their tracks. "You think you can escape me?" he snarled, stepping out from the shadows. The boy's heart leaped into his throat. Victor was blocking their path, his eyes blazing with fury. Clara stepped in front of the boy, shielding him and the baby with her body. "Leave us alone, Victor," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We're not afraid of you anymore." Victor laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You should be." The boy's mind raced. They were out of options, or so it seemed. But then he remembered something, the old groundskeeper's shed he had seen earlier, tucked away in the corner of the garden. If they could reach it, they might find something to defend themselves with. "Clara," he whispered, tugging on her sleeve. "The shed. Follow me." Without waiting for a response, he turned and bolted toward the shed, Clara close behind. Victor let out a roar of anger and gave chase, his heavy footsteps pounding against the ground. The boy reached the shed first, yanking the door open and ushering Clara inside. He grabbed the first thing he could find, a rusty shovel, and turned to face Victor, his hands shaking but his resolve unwavering. "Stay back," he shouted, brandishing the shovel like a weapon. Victor hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the boy. For a moment, it seemed like he might back down. But then, with a snarl, he lunged forward. The boy swung the shovel with all his might, the metal connecting with Victor's shoulder with a sickening thud. Victor stumbled back, clutching his arm and cursing loudly. "Run!" the boy shouted to Clara, and together they dashed out of the shed and toward the gate. This time, there was no stopping them. They burst through the gate and into the night, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they ran toward the safety of the town lights in the distance. The boy and Clara ran as fast as they could, their feet pounding against the uneven road. The baby, now awake and sensing the urgency, began to cry softly, but Clara held him tightly, whispering soothing words as she ran. The boy glanced over his shoulder, his heart racing as he half expected to see Victor chasing after them. But for now, the road behind them was empty. The town lights glimmered in the distance, a beacon of hope. Yet the distance felt impossibly far, and the boy's legs burned with every step. He clutched the rusty shovel in his hand, his knuckles white, ready to defend them if Victor appeared again. "We're almost there," Clara panted, her voice strained but determined. "Just a little farther." But just as they rounded a bend in the road, the sound of an engine roared behind them. The boy's stomach dropped as he turned to see Victor's car speeding toward them, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin beams of doom. "He's coming," the boy shouted, panic rising in his chest. Clara's face paled, but she didn't stop running. "The woods," she cried, pointing to a dense thicket of trees just off the road. "We can lose him in there." Without hesitation, the boy followed her as she veered off the road and into the woods. The underbrush was thick and unforgiving, branches scratching at their arms and faces as they pushed through. The baby's cries grew louder, but Clara pressed on, her determination unwavering. Behind them, the car screeched to a halt, and Victor's voice echoed through the night. "You can't hide from me." The boy's heart pounded as he glanced back, catching a glimpse of Victor's silhouette as he climbed out of the car and began to pursue them on foot. The man was relentless, his heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush as he closed the distance. "We need to split up," the boy whispered urgently. "I'll lead him away. You take the baby and keep going." Clara shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "No. I'm not leaving you. You have to, the boy insisted. He'll catch us if we stay together. I'll be fine, I promise. Clara hesitated, torn between fear and gratitude. Finally, she nodded, her voice breaking. Be careful. The boy gave her a quick nod before veering off to the left, crashing through the underbrush as loudly as he could. Over here, Victor, he shouted, his voice trembling but defiant. Victor's head snapped toward the sound, and he changed course, his eyes narrowing as he stalked after the boy. You think you're clever, kid, he growled. You're dead meat. The boy's heart raced as he ran, his legs burning with exhaustion. He could hear Victor gaining on him, the man's heavy breaths growing louder with every step. He knew he couldn't outrun him forever, but he didn't need to, he just needed to buy Clara enough time to get away. As he ran, the boy spotted a fallen tree up ahead, its trunk thick and gnarled. He scrambled over it, then turned to face Victor, the rusty shovel still clutched in his hands. Victor emerged from the shadows, his face twisted with rage. You've got guts, kid, he sneered. But guts won't save you. The boy tightened his grip on the shovel, his hands trembling but his resolve steady. You're not going to hurt them, he said, his voice firm. Not while I'm here. Victor laughed, a cold, cruel sound. We'll see about that. He lunged forward, but the boy was ready. With a cry of defiance, he swung the shovel with all his might, the metal connecting with Victor's side with a sickening thud. Victor stumbled back, clutching his ribs and cursing loudly. The boy didn't wait to see what happened next. He turned and ran, his legs carrying him as fast as they could go. Behind him, he could hear Victor's furious shouts, but they grew fainter with every step. Finally, the boy emerged from the woods and onto a quiet residential street. He collapsed onto the pavement, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. He had done it, he had bought Clara and the baby enough time to escape. But as he lay there, his body trembling with exhaustion, he couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal wasn't over yet. The boy lay on the pavement for what felt like an eternity, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The night was quiet now, the only sound the distant chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. But the boy knew better than to let his guard down. Victor was still out there, and he wouldn't give up easily. As he pushed himself to his feet, the boy heard a soft voice call out from the shadows. Hey, kid. Over here. He froze, his heart racing as he turned toward the sound. An elderly man stepped out from behind a nearby tree, his face lined with age but his eyes sharp and alert. He held a flashlight in one hand and a walking stick in the other, and though his posture was slightly hunched, there was a quiet strength about him. Who are you?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. The man smiled gently. "Name's Henry. I've been watching that mansion for a while now. Saw you and that woman running like the devil himself was on your heels. Figured you could use some help." The boy hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. But something about Henry's calm demeanor put him at ease. "Victor, he's after us. He's got a woman and a baby trapped in that mansion. We tried to escape, but..." Henry nodded, his expression grim. "I know. I've seen him coming and going. Always thought there was something off about that man. But I'm just an old groundskeeper, didn't think anyone would believe me if I said anything." The boy's eyes widened. "You're the groundskeeper? From the mansion?" Henry chuckled softly. "Used to be, anyway. Retired a few years back, but I still keep an eye on the place. Couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right." The boy felt a flicker of hope. Henry led Clara, the boy, and the baby to a small, weathered shed tucked behind an old church on the edge of town. Inside, the space was cluttered with tools, ropes, and other supplies. Henry moved with purpose, gathering what they needed as he explained his plan. "Victor's strong, but he's not smart," Henry said, his voice steady. "He's predictable. If we can lure him into the mansion's basement, we can trap him there. The door's heavy, and there's a lock on the outside. Once he's in, he won't be able to get out." The boy frowned. "But how do we get him down there? He's not just going to walk in on his own." Henry's eyes gleamed with a hint of mischief. "We give him a reason to. Clara, you'll be the bait. He's obsessed with controlling you, he won't be able to resist if he thinks you're back in the mansion." Clara's face paled, but she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Henry turned to the boy. "You and I will hide in the basement. When Victor comes down, we'll lock him in. It's risky, but it's the only way." The boy swallowed hard but nodded. "Let's do it." The plan was set in motion. Clara returned to the mansion, her heart pounding as she stepped inside. The place felt even more oppressive now, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. She moved to the basement door, her hands trembling as she opened it and descended the stairs. The boy and Henry were already in position, hidden behind a stack of boxes near the door. The boy clutched a heavy iron bar, his knuckles white, while Henry held a length of rope, ready to secure the door if needed. It didn't take long for Victor to arrive. The sound of his car pulling up outside sent a chill through the basement. The boy held his breath as heavy footsteps echoed through the mansion, growing louder with every second. Victor's voice rang out, cold and furious. "Clara! I know you're here. You can't hide from me." Clara stood in the center of the basement, her arms wrapped around herself as if to ward off the cold. "I'm here, Victor," she called out, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Victor appeared at the top of the stairs, his face twisted with rage. "You thought you could run from me," he snarled, descending the steps with deliberate slowness. "You belong to me, Clara. You and that brat of yours." Clara took a step back, her eyes darting toward the shadows where the boy and Henry were hidden. "I'm not yours, Victor. I never was." Victor let out a harsh laugh. "You'll learn." As he reached the bottom of the stairs, the boy and Henry sprang into action. The boy swung the iron bar with all his might, striking Victor's leg and sending him stumbling to the ground. Henry rushed forward, grabbing Victor's arms and pinning them behind his back. "Now!" Henry shouted. The boy dropped the bar and grabbed the rope, helping Henry tie Victor's hands together. Victor roared in anger, thrashing against their hold, but the two of them worked quickly, securing the knots as tightly as they could. "You think this will stop me?" Victor spat, his eyes blazing with hatred. "I'll find you. All of you." Henry ignored him, dragging Victor toward the far corner of the basement. The boy grabbed the iron bar again, standing guard as Henry secured Victor to a sturdy pipe. "It's over, Victor," Henry said, his voice calm but firm. "You're not going anywhere." Victor struggled against the ropes, his face red with fury. But the knots held, and for the first time, he seemed to realize he was trapped. Clara stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "You can't hurt us anymore," she said, her voice trembling but strong. The boy stood beside her, his chest heaving with exertion but his spirit unbroken. "We're free," he said, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. Henry placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his expression one of quiet pride. "You did good, kid. Real good." With Victor securely tied up and his threats echoing uselessly in the basement, the boy, Clara, and Henry made their way back upstairs. The first light of dawn was breaking through the windows, casting a soft golden glow over the mansion's dusty interior. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air didn't feel heavy with fear. Clara sat down on the steps, cradling her baby, who had finally fallen asleep. She looked exhausted but relieved, her shoulders no longer hunched under the weight of Victor's control. The boy sat beside her, his hand still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the night's events. Henry stood nearby, his expression thoughtful as he watched the two of them. "What happens now?" the boy asked, breaking the silence. Henry sighed, leaning on his walking stick. "We call the police. Victor's going to face justice for what he's done. And you too." He looked at Clara and the boy, his eyes softening. "You'll be safe. No one's going to hurt you anymore." Clara nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Both of you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped us." The boy looked down at his hands, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I just did what I thought was right." Henry chuckled softly. "Sometimes, that's all it takes. Doing the right thing, even when it's hard." The police arrived shortly after, their flashing lights cutting through the early morning stillness. Victor was arrested, his threats and curses falling on deaf ears as he was led away in handcuffs. Clara gave her statement, her voice steady as she recounted the horrors she had endured. The boy stood by her side, his presence a silent reminder of the courage it had taken to escape. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Henry approached the boy, his expression serious but kind. "You've got a good heart, kid. Don't ever let the world take that away from you." The boy nodded, his chest swelling with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. "I won't." Clara walked over, her baby now awake and cooing softly in her arms. She placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved us," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." The boy shrugged, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I couldn't leave you there." Clara smiled, tears streaming down her face. "You're family now. Both of you." Henry's eyes twinkled with warmth. "Looks like we've all found something we've been missing."